Things that once seemed overwhelming begin to lose their dominance. Situations that once created fear begin to appear smaller in comparison to God's greatness. This does not mean problems disappear, but perception changes significantly. Another key lesson is dependence. Supernatural encounters often remind a person of their need for God in a very direct way. In moments of divine awareness, human self-sufficiency is challenged. The illusion of control becomes less convincing. A person realizes more deeply that life is sustained not by human strength alone, but by divine grace, wisdom, and guidance. This realization is not meant to create insecurity. It is meant to produce humility. True humility is not weakness. It is accurate understanding of dependence. It acknowledges that while human effort is important, ultimate direction and sustainment come from God. Another lesson that often emerges is alignment. When God reveals himself in a deeper way, there is often an internal adjustment that follows. Priorities begin to shift. Desires begin to be evaluated more carefully. Decisions begin to be weighed against spiritual truth rather than personal preference alone. This process of alignment is one of the most important outcomes of divine encounters. Now consider how transformation actually takes place. It does not usually happen in the moment of the encounter alone. It happens afterward, when the person reflects, responds, and applies what was revealed. This is where many people either grow or lose what they received. If the lesson is embraced, it produces lasting change. If it is ignored, the impact fades over time. Another important truth is that supernatural encounters often bring confirmation rather than new confusion. While the experience itself may feel overwhelming at first, the message from God is usually consistent with his word and character. Over time, the person often realizes that what they experienced was not meant to introduce something contradictory, but to confirm or deepen existing truth. This highlights an important principle. God's revelation always aligns with his nature. He does not contradict himself. So any lesson received in a spiritual encounter should ultimately be measured by its alignment with truth and character as revealed in Scripture. Another lesson often revealed is responsibility. Many encounters remind individuals that spiritual awareness comes with accountability. When a person receives insight, understanding, or direction, they are no longer in the same place of ignorance they were before. That awareness creates responsibility to respond appropriately. This is why spiritual experiences are not meant to be stored as memories alone. They are meant to shape behavior, decisions, and spiritual growth. The weight of what has been revealed often calls a person to a higher level of obedience and consistency. Finally, one of the most profound lessons is that God is relational, not distant. Supernatural encounters often leave a lasting impression of his nearness. This does not mean he is only near in extraordinary moments, but that those moments remove spiritual dullness and make his presence more conscious and real. When that awareness remains, it changes how a person prays, how they trust, and how they live. Prayer becomes more sincere. Faith becomes more stable. Obedience becomes more willing. And spiritual life becomes more deeply connected to reality rather than routine. Ultimately, the lessons revealed during supernatural encounters are not meant to remain isolated experiences. They are meant to continue working within a person long after the moment has passed, shaping character, strengthening faith, and guiding life into deeper alignment with God's purpose in a way that produces lasting transformation rather than temporary impression. Avoiding the trap of chasing experiences is one of the most important safeguards for maintaining spiritual balance, maturity, and genuine relationship with God. Many believers begin with sincere desire for God, but over time, curiosity about supernatural experiences can slowly shift their focus away from the Lord Himself and toward the pursuit of unusual manifestations, emotional highs, or extraordinary encounters. At first, the desire may seem harmless. People want to feel God more deeply, see His power more clearly, or experience something beyond ordinary spiritual life. But if that desire becomes the central pursuit rather than a byproduct of relationship, it can gradually distort spiritual priorities. Because the goal of faith was never experiences, it was communion. Now understand something very important. God is not against supernatural experiences. Throughout Scripture, He reveals Himself in various ways according to His purpose, but He never intended those experiences to become the foundation of spiritual life. They are expressions of His presence, not substitutes for relationship with Him. The danger begins when experiences become the measure of spirituality. When that happens, a subtle shift takes place. Instead of asking, "Am I walking with God?" a person begins asking, "Did I feel something today?" Instead of focusing on obedience, they begin focusing on sensation. Instead of seeking faithfulness, they begin seeking confirmation through emotional or supernatural stimulation. This creates instability because experiences fluctuate. Some days feel strong. Other days feel quiet. Some seasons feel deeply spiritual. Other seasons feel ordinary. If a person's spiritual confidence is based on experiences, then their stability will rise and fall with those fluctuations. But God designed spiritual life to be anchored in something more stable than experience: His Word, His character, and consistent relationship with Him. Now consider what happens when people begin chasing experiences. They may become more focused on signs than obedience. They may begin interpreting every emotion as spiritual significance. They may start assigning meaning to things that are not actually divine communication. Over time, this can lead to confusion rather than clarity. Spiritual sensitivity without grounding can become instability. That is why discernment is essential. True spiritual maturity does not reject experiences, but it does not depend on them either. It keeps them in their proper place, secondary to relationship and obedience. Now here is something important. God's presence is not measured by unusual manifestations. There are times when God's presence is deeply real in a quiet room of prayer, with no dramatic feelings at all. There are times when spiritual growth is happening internally without any visible or emotional signals. If a person only recognizes God when something feels extraordinary, they may miss His presence in the ordinary. This is one of the key dangers of chasing experiences. It conditions the heart to overlook consistency in favor of intensity. But spiritual life is often built in consistency, not intensity. Faithfulness in prayer, consistency in obedience, steadiness in Scripture, humility in daily living. These are often where the deepest spiritual growth happens. Now think about how chasing experiences affects expectation. A person who constantly seeks something extraordinary may become dissatisfied with ordinary spiritual practices. Prayer may feel insufficient unless something unusual happens. Worship may feel incomplete unless there is a strong emotional response. Over time, this creates dependence on stimulation rather than relationship. But genuine spiritual growth produces the opposite effect. It brings contentment in God's presence, regardless of emotional intensity. It produces stability, whether feelings are strong or quiet. It builds trust that is not dependent on sensations. Another important truth is that chasing experiences can distract from obedience. God's direction is often simple, practical, and consistent with Scripture. But when someone is focused on supernatural phenomena, they may overlook clear instructions because they are looking for something more dramatic. In doing so, they miss the quiet guidance of God that often comes through conviction, wisdom, and Scripture. Now consider the emotional impact. Chasing experiences can lead to cycles of spiritual excitement followed by emptiness. When a person experiences something powerful, they feel elevated. But when that experience fades, they may feel disconnected and begin searching again for the next emotional high. This cycle can create instability and frustration. But spiritual maturity breaks that cycle by shifting focus from experience to relationship. Now here is something very important. God is not withholding himself from his people. The issue is not absence of God, it is misplaced focus. When the heart is centered on him rather than on experiences, awareness of his presence becomes more stable and grounded. True spiritual depth is not measured by how many extraordinary moments a person has, but by how consistently they walk with God in faith, obedience, and humility. Another key safeguard is humility. A humble heart does not demand experiences. It receives whatever God chooses to give. It does not chase manifestations. It seeks relationship. It does not measure spiritual life by unusual moments. It measures it by faithfulness. When humility is present, balance is preserved. Finally, the greatest protection against chasing experiences is love for God himself. When love for God becomes the primary motivation, everything else falls into proper order. Experiences may come or they may not, but they are no longer the focus. The focus becomes knowing him, trusting him, and walking with him. And in that place, spiritual life becomes stable, grounded, and deeply rooted, not in moments of excitement, but in a consistent, living relationship that produces maturity, discernment, and lasting transformation beyond temporary, emotional, or supernatural experiences. Living daily in the light of divine encounters is where spiritual maturity is truly revealed, because the real measure of an encounter is not how intense it was in the moment, but how deeply it continues to shape a person's life afterward. Many people remember extraordinary spiritual moments with excitement, but over time, the impact fades if those moments are not translated into daily obedience, faith, and consistent relationship with God. A true encounter with God is never meant to remain a memory. It is meant to become a pattern of life. When a person has a genuine awareness of God's reality, whether through scripture revelation, deep conviction, answered prayer, or a profound spiritual experience, the question becomes, how does that awareness shape ordinary living? Because it is in ordinary life that spiritual truth is tested and proven. Now understand something very important. Divine encounters are not isolated highlights in a believer's journey. They are meant to produce continuity. They should influence how a person thinks, how they respond, how they pray, how they make decisions, and how they view everyday circumstances. Without that continuity, even the most powerful experience becomes disconnected from real transformation. One of the first ways to live in the light of divine encounters is through remembrance with purpose. This does not mean living in the past emotionally, but allowing what God has revealed to remain active in present awareness. When God shows something, speaks something, or impresses something upon the heart, that revelation is meant to be carried forward into daily obedience. Many people lose spiritual momentum because they treat encounters as finished events instead of ongoing instructions. But what God reveals is often not completed. In a moment it unfolds over time as it is walked out in faith. Another important aspect is consistency in obedience. If a person has truly encountered God in a meaningful way, that encounter should produce alignment. It should influence decisions that follow. It should shape priorities. It should adjust behavior where needed. Without obedience, revelation remains incomplete, because understanding without response does not produce transformation. Living in the light of divine encounters means allowing what has been revealed to influence what is done next. Now consider the role of awareness. After a spiritual encounter, whether dramatic or subtle, there is often an increased sensitivity to God's presence. Living in that awareness means not ignoring it when life becomes busy or distracting. It means maintaining a consciousness that God is still present in ordinary moments, not only in extraordinary ones. This awareness helps keep the heart grounded. It prevents spiritual forgetfulness, where a person intellectually believes in God, but functionally lives as though he is distant. Instead, awareness keeps relationship active and personal. Another important truth is that divine encounters should increase humility, not pride. A person who has truly experienced God in a deeper way should become more aware of dependence, not more confident in self. They should become more grateful, more teachable, and more sensitive to spiritual truth. If an encounter leads to pride, it has been misunderstood. But if it leads to humility and reverence, it is producing the right fruit. Now think about perseverance. Living in the light of divine encounters also means holding on to what has been revealed, even when feelings fluctuate. There will be times when spiritual awareness feels strong, and other times when it feels quiet. But consistency is not based on feeling. It is based on faithfulness. What was revealed in a moment of clarity is not invalidated by moments of silence. Instead, it is carried through them. This is where many believers grow deeper, not in constant intensity, but in steady trust. Another key aspect is integration. A divine encounter should not remain separate from everyday life. It should influence relationships, decisions, attitudes, and responses. If it does not affect how a person lives, then it remains disconnected from purpose. True spiritual growth happens when revelation becomes lifestyle. Now consider the importance of gratitude. Living in the light of divine encounters involves remembering not only what was experienced, but what it reveals about God's character. Gratitude keeps the heart soft and responsive. It prevents spiritual hardness and keeps awareness fresh. When gratitude is present, the memory of God's work becomes a source of strength rather than just recollection. Another important principle is continued pursuit, even after meaningful encounters. The believer is still called to seek God. The encounter is not the destination. It is encouragement for deeper relationship. It strengthens pursuit rather than replacing it. This keeps spiritual life alive and growing rather than static. Now think about stability. One of the greatest outcomes of living in the light of divine encounters is internal stability. A person becomes less shaken by circumstances because they carry a deeper awareness of God's reality. Challenges still come, but interpretation changes. Fear loses dominance. Confidence increases. Peace becomes more stable. Finally, living in the light of divine encounters is ultimately about relationship continuity. It is the ongoing awareness that God is not distant, not occasional, and not limited to extraordinary moments. He is present, active, and involved in every season of life. And when that truth is carried into daily living, spiritual life becomes more than a memory of powerful moments. It becomes a steady walk of faith, obedience, humility, and awareness that shapes character, strengthens trust, and produces lasting transformation long after the original encounter has passed.